I was in a wheelchair, and it was not looking like it was going to get any different than that for many, many months. Um, I kept hoping it was something other than what it turned out to be. But this diagnosis is, quite um, defined, and there's a skin biopsy and genetic testing that prove it. So I have the disease, I have the disorder. I just have a healing that's miraculous. Last November, went for a walk in the cold, in the very cold New Hampshire day, like it was in the teens. But I'd done that lots of times. And this particular day, I must have gotten quite cold because a week later, one of my toes was bright purple and sciatic looking, like it was, really had some kind of injury to it. And I had had a lightning bolt flash of pain in it as well during one night. And my husband, who's a psychiatrist, kind of doctor, looked at it and said, "You better call the doctor right away. That looks really serious." And I did. And she said, not too worried about it. It's probably Raynaud's, and come in on Monday. It was the weekend. And so I did. And it was diagnosed as chilblains, which is a very Dickens-like old-fashioned cold injury. And it was supposed to go away in 2 weeks, but it didn't. It got worse. And so that's the beginning of a couple of months of my sort of going through various symptoms, and slowly but surely, my feet became more and more painful. Started in one toe, it's ended up spreading to all my toes, to the point where I could not walk. And I was getting various doctors' diagnosis, but none of them were holding for very long. And I kept getting tested and tested and tested. And by mid-February, I had to be in a wheelchair going to the airport. I couldn't walk. What I was really afraid I had was neuropathy, because my father had neuropathy. Eventually, I came to accept that I had this neurological disorder. And like many months later, I had a skin biopsy and a genetic test that proved that I did have this neurological disorder. The hard part about this diagnosis is that if you read about it in any of the medical journals, or you talk to a neurologist, they will all tell you that it's progressive and that it's not reversible. And so what happened is I started talking to people who had it, and the more people I talked to who had it, the more depressed I got, because people were literally living in recliners. They weren't able to go outside because they couldn't wear shoes. For years, for decades, and their lives were lived on either opiates or just very intense painkillers. And it eventually can affect all of your organs, your heart, your digestive tract, even your eyes. It's a spreading disease, or it can be. And so I had a lot of fear and trauma around it, because I kept getting traumatized by listening to these stories. So the whole field around me was so negative, and the fears were feeding into my pain. And it was extremely painful. I've never had anything so painful in my life. I cried like every day, most of the day. I even thought about suicide. I just couldn't imagine living my life like this. And I've always been a really active person. Walking gives me my vitality. I walk an hour every day. It was inconceivable. And I was sort of not getting enough sleep. I was foggy from the meds. So my attitude was, it's pretty self-absorbed and pretty despairing. obviously people live with a lot worse things than this, but I just felt like this was the worst thing in the world I could live with. And that's the state I was in when various friends started reaching out to me with various things, and Rebecca was one of them. And she began offering a 21-day meditation, which I gladly accepted and started doing. And it was on the topic of hope. And I got enough hope in me, and I was like a sponge. I couldn't even, I could barely function. I could barely sit in a chair. I had to lay back in a relax the back chair to even listen to the meditation. But enough of it must have penetrated that I began to feel somewhat hopeful. And so when she recommended a MAP session with her, I just said yes, because I was saying yes to anything that would help at that point. And she did a magnetization with me, and I magnetized that I would heal from this. And she also, she talked about intentions, and she talked about imagining oneself in the future. And I began to work on imagining myself in the future as healed from something that my Western rational mind knew was not healable. And then she started the Monday night MAP groups, and I started going every Monday night. And I had one thing I was always working on, and that was this, being totally healed, my nerves being regenerated, and my ability to walk being restored. And one time she mentioned Yelena to me, and I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. And so I interviewed with Yelena for, like 45 minutes explaining what I was going through. And she made a tape for me, and I started listening to the tape every day. I still listen to it, and I think I got it in, I think it was October. And I now cross-country ski, and I walk every day in the cold, and I have no pain. And my life has been restored to me, and it's pretty miraculous. You have these in your body, you have these, and in your brain, you have these sort of memories stored. And I've had my share of trauma in my life. And you think you're dealing with it, but if you have had enough, you're probably not dealing with it. You're probably in lots of ways storing it inside your body. And your brain, I really believe that your brain is processing things from the past over and over again. And unless you interrupt it, you're not going to get anything different. So the interruption that MAP, I feel if I understand MAP, which I'm not saying I really understand it, I love what happens when I am in a MAP session, and that's enough for me. But as I let myself go into a kind of trance, which is what I do, I feel like things come up from my unconscious. And as the words and the soothingness of Rebecca's voice, frankly, her energy, her presence is actually part of what happens. That energy, I think, begins to help. And the words, I don't know how the words work, but it opens those synaptic connections, those memories, and allows them to be regenerated in a more positive way. And sometimes I consciously work to reframe the memory along with it, but sometimes I just let it happen. And I know in Yelena's tapes that it's just happening, because most of the time I'm sleeping. I often will listen to hers at 4 a.m, and I turn it on and I ask for a guide to accompany me as the subliminal messages are given to me, and that it work on the things that need to be resolved and need to be made into more light, and I just fall asleep and let that happen. I mean, I'm like a lot of other rational Western thinkers. Our thinking doesn't necessarily help this process. It can get in the way. So I try not to get too, tied into what I can do. Yeah, so I was doing many things, and the body is complicated, and lots of stuff was going on. But I kept testing my walking, and I wasn't able to walk without the pain coming back. So even when I felt like maybe the meds were working, because I had gotten rid of a lot of meds, but I still kept one or two. And I mean, there was a point in which I was taking, like, I don't know, 30 pills a day. So I had stopped all of that, and I was just maybe taking one or two that were, that I hadn't yet decided if I should stop or not. But it still wasn't enough to keep my feet from burning if I walked. It was enough to keep them from burning if I was just sitting down. And I had some trepidation about walking, about testing it. I didn't want to know that it wasn't going to work. And I really had trepidation about the winter, because that's when it got worse, the worst, and the cold. And so after I'd listened to Yelena's tape for like a month, I went for a walk outside, and it was, at that time it was getting cold in Boston. And I just was shocked that I had no sensations, no reaction whatsoever. And I haven't had any since. I mean, I keep listening to her tape, but I from that day forward, I have been able to take longer and longer walks. I've been able to go in very cold weather. I've been able to go cross-country skiing. I never thought I'd cross-country ski again in my life. And so it's not going away. It's not dependent on the weather. It's not, it's just a miracle. It's a miracle. And I'm grateful every time I take a walk. I thank Yelena and Rebecca every time I take a walk, which is every day. Yeah. I have a little video of me skiing down a little hill cross-country skiing. I have another picture of me with my arms up in the air, because it's like, this is incredible. Who would ever think that this could happen a year ago?